Welcome to Wonders and Miracles podcast, where we celebrate miraculous moments in everyday lives. I'm Liza Lawrence. I'm glad to have you join me as we celebrate wonders and miracles together. I am here with Cody today. He's from Missouri, and Cody and I have a great connection because he is my cousin, and it was so fun to see his submission come in, and I've sort of followed this story through his wife on Facebook and social media, and now I get to hear all the details, and I'm really excited about that. This is a story of Cody's job loss, job search, and then job gain, and the miracles that he has seen through that journey. So Cody, thanks for being on the show and submitting this story, and tell us what happened.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on. It is truly a pleasure to be part of your podcast. So I'm super excited, especially as someone that listens to podcasts all the time. It's pretty exciting to be on this one. So I'm super happy about it.
Yay. Thanks.
Yeah. It's a really cool story, at least for me. But when I was in college, I started working for Costco, never planning on staying there for a long period of time, but life happens, and I ended up staying at Costco for over 12 years. And I love Costco. Great company. They were great to work for. They treated us really well. I worked in 4 different states and a bunch of different locations and moved all over the country for them. And it was a really, really good experience. And I had always planned on just staying there forever because it was really good. And even during those 12 years, I only applied for 2 other jobs ever. One was because a friend really pressured me to do it. And the other one was for this second company. And I probably shouldn't say the company's name because I don't want them to sue me for slander. What I'm about to say. But I was really happy with where I was, and I found this new company that was expanding and growing nationwide, and it was just really enticing. And just kind of on a whim, I decided I'll just apply for it, not thinking much of it. But they ended up calling me and flying me out to Arizona to meet with their big executives, and they made me this really attractive offer and made me feel pretty. And I decided that I would switch it up. And after a lot of thought and prayer with my wife, we decided that we'll take this big risk. And so we uprooted our family again and moved to St. Louis to open up this brand new market for them and just build their business from scratch in the St. Louis area. It was really hard work, and I really enjoyed it, and things were going super well. It was long hours and just a ton of work, but I really liked it. There were a couple little things that I didn't like. They asked me to do a few unethical things that I refused to do. And I was having some big debates with their legal department about the legality of what they were asking. But in the long run, I ended up doing really well. So they gave me a big award. They flew me out to Arizona to give me this market leader award for these customer satisfaction rates because I was the #1 in the company for that. And then they had me do a big presentation to the CEO and the COO and all the market leaders about what I was doing specifically in St. Louis to make it so successful. And I got my review, which was the most glowing review ever. So I was riding my high horse. I really thought highly of myself and my work ethic because it was just going so well. It was great. And then my boss flew out and terminated me for a reason that I can't go into it just because as much as I would love to. But anyone that's ever heard the story is like, yeah, that's a pretty bogus reason. And so it was really, really shocking. I just got totally blindsided by the whole thing. Didn't expect it at all. And I remember just being so upset. And I remember driving home and being like, what am I going to tell my family? Like I have 5 young kids and a wife, and I'm the sole provider for them. And to all of a sudden have that taken away and just be like, how am I going to provide for my family? It was just really, really hard. I remember sitting down with my family and having that really difficult conversation. I was really upset. And I remember my 6-year-old son hearing that, we weren't going to be able to spend much money anymore and how he had to kind of change our lifestyle. He lost his first tooth the night before. And so he went up to his room and got his tooth fairy money from his very first tooth and tried to give it to me. It was just he's just the sweetest boy.
So sweet.
So, I mean, there are these little miracles spread throughout this entire story of just little tender moments. But it was a really, really hard thing for me. But I thought really highly of myself and my abilities. I have a high education. I had lots of good experience. And so I was optimistic. And right around this time, when people learned about what had happened, because news always spreads fast like this, I had a guy from church reach out to me, someone that I'd never spoken to before. I knew who he was, he knew who I was, but we'd never had an actual conversation. And he reached out to me and was like, hey, let's go to lunch. And so I went to lunch with him, and he was like, here's what I do. And he looked at my background and he said, bring your resume. And I showed it to him. He's like, you would be really, really good at what I do. Like, and there's so much opportunity and such a need for it. And of course, he is like at the pinnacle of his career and hyper successful. And he was like, and I'll mentor you. And it was great. And I was super excited about it. And then like the following day, a friend of my wife's from high school, who we never talked to, reached out, and he does the same thing. And even though I'd never spoken to him, he reached out to me and he was like, look, I saw your background. You would be really, really good at this. And so I was like, obviously this is the Lord's hand in guiding me into this new career. And so I was super excited about it and very optimistic. And so, you know, the next day I signed up for this course and I paid outrageous amounts of money to get this certification. And I went and did it, and I started applying for jobs. And every job that I applied for was like, we want 2 years of experience, or we want 5 years of experience. And I could not, I applied to hundreds of jobs. I spent hours and hours every day applying for jobs, but I couldn't get a single phone call. I couldn't get an interview. I couldn't get any interest at all. And so I started hitting up every contact that I had. So every person, if I'd ever met you one time, you were going to get a phone call from me asking if you knew anybody or if you had anything or something along those lines. Eventually, I had one contact from a gentleman that I knew, and he set me up with a recruiter for this really prominent company in St. Louis. And it was a really great opportunity. They're one of the highest rated companies to work for in St. Louis, and everything was lining up perfectly. And I was just feeling super blessed about all this. And what they do is they actually take a cohort of people and they say, okay, you don't have any background in this sector, in technology, and we're going to train you. We're going to put you through this boot camp type experience, and then you're going to work for us, and it's going to be great. Because they have such a need for these people that they were the ones that were willing to train you to do it. And so they set me up with this time to go interview with this group, gave us the material to study. And so I showed up, and it was an all-day event. And they started off with a really intense exam. And then they went into the interviews. And during the interviews went really, really well. And even a couple of the interviewers were like in that secretive, hushed tone, like, hey, how do you think you did on the test? And I was like, I think I did okay. And they're like, you did by far the best. Like you really, really did well on this exam. And so I was like, this is great. Like, I'm so excited. Everything was lining up perfect. And then we had these case studies that I thought went really well. And so I was feeling really optimistic, and I went home, and it just seemed like it was all lined up. And then 2 weeks later, I got the phone call that I've been waiting for, just for this unemployment stint to finally be over, because it was.
And how long had it been? It
had been over 2 months, which to me felt like an eternity. And so I finally got that phone call, and they were like, we've decided to take 4 of these people, and you were number 5. And so thank you, but not today. Oh. And it was almost, I was so excited about it, and everything seemed to line up so perfect that it was really hard to get that rejection on top of all the other rejections that I was already getting. And so that was really difficult. And of course, this was right before Christmas. Oh. And I was so excited because I was like, I'm going to have a job for Christmas. I'm going to be able to provide Christmas for my kids. And that was a really stressful thing, was for me to realize that, like, I can't give my kids gifts for Christmas. And they're 5 little kids. That's an important event for them.
Right.
And one really cool miracle that happened in between all of this is we had some friends from Kentucky, where we lived before, that we just got a call out of the blue from them. And they said, hey, we like to provide Christmas for one family a year, and we have decided to provide Christmas for you guys. And so they said, what do your kids want? And we told them what our kids wanted. And it was, I'm not exaggerating, it was the best Christmas my kids have ever had.
Wow. I love
even
that.
Though it was the hardest point in my life financially. And so it was just a really big miracle that we were able to enjoy because of the generosity of others. And there were so many other things. People would ring our doorbell, and we would open it up, and there'd be gift cards on our front porch or groceries. My family was super supportive. So just the fact that we didn't lose our home, and we didn't have to sell all of our belongings to be able to survive, was a really big miracle. So after that, I decided maybe this career path isn't what I was supposed to do. So I said, I'm going to keep trying for this path, but I have to provide. Like, I need to go back to my old career. So I started looking for jobs in operations management, which is what I was doing before, because I had all this experience and these degrees. And of course, I thought really highly of myself still with my abilities. And I applied for every job, and I just could not get a job. Even these jobs that I was so qualified for, and the pay scale was so much less than what I was originally making, And every time they just be like, well, thanks for trying. We just don't think you have enough experience. I have like a decade of experience. How much are you looking for? So it was a very humbling experience. And well, you know my family, Liza, but my parents are extremely hard workers. Like my dad had 2 full-time jobs growing up, and a work ethic is something that has been drilled into me from my childhood. And it's something that was a big part of my identity, and my self-worth was just like, I am a good worker. Like I am a good provider. And to have that taken away was really difficult for me and a big blow to my self-esteem. And the months kept going on. And so it was like February, and I hadn't had a job for like 4 or 5 months. And I was getting ready to the point to either go work at Taco Bell, which would be fine, no shame in that, but I needed to do something. Or my parents were like, you should come move back with us. And what 40-year-old with 5 kids doesn't want to move back in with their parents?
Right.
So the situation was getting a little bit desperate. And a couple months before that, I had learned of an organization called Launch Code. Basically, they just take untrained people, and because there's such a need for technical people, they teach them how to be software developers, and then they send them up with these apprenticeships. And I reached out to them, not thinking much of it, and I sat down with them, and they're like, yeah, if anything ever comes up for your role, we'll think of you. And eventually, I finally got a call from them. And the way that it works is they set you up with an apprenticeship. So even though I didn't go through their program, they thought of me and they called me up and they said, we have this thing that might work out for you. It's $15 an hour with no benefits, and it is 90 minutes away. So it would be 3-hour commute each day, which would be very, very difficult for me to support a family with that. But at that point, I was so desperate, I was going to do anything. So I decided, yeah, I'll go, let's go talk to them. So I drove out to them. It's a small company that does contract work for the government. So they develop software for the Air Force, and I met with them. The interview went really well, and they knew what I was expecting. That it was $15 an hour with no benefits. And then after the interview, they're like, you are a guinea pig. You were the first person that we've ever considered with no background in technical stuff and no military background. Like we've never thought of ever doing this, but we wanted to see if hiring someone with no experience would bring a different perspective to the company. And I was like, oh, that's great, because no one does that. And these were the first people that were ever willing to give me a second look with my lack of background. And I was like, no, that'd be great. I think that's awesome. Let's do that. And then Dan, my boss, was just like, and I know that you're expecting $15 an hour. He's like, I'm just going to give you a salary with benefits. Without me asking, without me trying, because I had no leverage in this. I was just desperate for anything. And so he's like, yeah, let's just do that. We'll just give you a salary with full benefits.
Wow.
And really good, and which was exactly what I needed. And I was just so grateful. And it was such a miracle to get that. And so I finally had a job after 7 months, which was the best feeling ever. And it gets even better because I started working, and it was a very difficult transition because I had no background. So it was a struggle. And right before I hit 3 months, they called me into the office, which they'd never called me into the office before. So I'm like, oh, my probationary period, it's going to be a thanks, but no thanks type situation. And they called me and they said, we think you've done really well. We're going to double your responsibility and give you a second team. And we're also going to give you a big fat pay raise.
Oh.
Without me asking again. And it put me up almost to what I was making before I had my job loss. And just everything has just lined up, and it's been just so miraculous. And as I look back on all of this, it just makes me realize that the Lord provided all of this in such a very specific way to make sure that I knew that it was a blessing from Him and not because of my own abilities or skills or charm or anything else. But it is abundantly clear that it was just a miracle from Him and nothing else. And then there's so many other things I was able to learn. I had a much needed dose of humility, which has been really helpful to have. I have a lot more empathy for those people that struggle with job loss or having troubles in that area. And now that I work in this different industry, even though I commute 3 hours a day, I'm home far more often than I was before. I still work less hours, and I don't have to work nights. I don't have to work weekends. And so it's been far more conducive to my family life. So that unemployment period was awful, and I don't recommend it to anyone because it was so incredibly difficult. But now that I'm at the other side of it, I can look at my life and see God's hand there and just realize that this is so much better for our family, even though it was not a fun way to get there.
Yeah. how was that unemployment period? What was your spiritual life like at that time? Because you mentioned that loss of self-esteem and self-worth, which, as a provider, I can totally understand. Like, what's my purpose now? I'm not living up to what I'm supposed to be doing. What did your spiritual life look like?
So during this time, I really tried hard to focus on my spiritual life. I need this blessing and I need it fast. And I was like, I'm going to do everything that I possibly can to show God that I want the blessings, that I'm deserving of it, or whatever you want to say. So I really tried hard to do that. And that's why, as it kind of extended and got longer and longer, it was hard, because I was like, I'm really trying to do everything that I can, and it just was not working. But it was good because I had time. Like, I had time to read my scriptures, and I had time to provide service at church, and I had time to do this stuff. And so I really tried to utilize my time well. And it ended up being a really good spiritual boost for me, to kind of get me back on to where I knew I should have been before. So that it's kind of, there's a dichotomy there, because part of me, it was a great spiritual upper. And then at the same time, it was almost a hard on my faith to say, I'm doing all this stuff. Why can't I get the blessing that I so desperately need? But luckily I had patience, and he pulled through at the end. That is for sure.
Yeah. And I love that you saw that, with that trial period, if you will, that 7 months unemployment, and trying as hard as you could, but getting a job, like you said, so far out of your level of training and understanding. Obviously it was God. And, had you gotten those other jobs, you wouldn't have been available for this opportunity. And so you have to I do anyway, I look at life like this great orchestration of events that God sees it all and knows what's coming. And we just have to be patient and trust that something great is going to come after that trial of our faith and that period. So that's amazing and beautiful, and so cool that after 3 months, first of all, that they just offered you a salary at the very beginning, like, whoa, crazy. And then upped your salary after 3 months is awesome. I'm so happy for you. That's amazing.
Yeah. And to look back on it, there was no other time period that they could have hired me and had this happen. It's like,
really?
Everything had to happen at that exact moment. So I couldn't have had that happen, right before Christmas. It wouldn't have worked. So there was I had to wait for that blessing, because that was the only time that it could have happened.
Interesting. I love that you can see that timing and the need for the timing. Yeah. Well, I'm sure your family was relieved, and your wife. What was her response to this job offer after 7 months?
She was ecstatic. She's like, we're going out to eat at McDonald's so we can pay for it.
Right. Let's have a party.
Yeah.
I remember when my husband, we were students, but when he got his first job, like real job, I remember that call that he'd got the job. And I think I sobbed for we got the job, like just that desire to want better for your family and want to provide and to have it fall into place. Like, it's just this, I think, exhilarating joy and gratefulness that sometimes we don't feel very often in life unless we've had, those struggles where then we see God's hand and it's like, oh, anyway, so I can imagine your wife feeling that way.
Yeah, that was getting that email with the final job offer that was official was one of the greatest reliefs I've ever felt. I was like, I slept very well finally that night. It was great.
I'm sure. I love that. Well, Cody, thank you for sharing this. And I have loved hearing the journey. I think it's just beautiful.
Yeah, it's really easy to see it looking back, but it was hard to see it looking forward. I'm just really grateful for it. For the experience.
And I think that's how miracles go. It's hard often to see it in the moment and to see God's hand playing out in the moment until you look back and go, holy cow, I see all these things. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this miracle story. Please subscribe to my channel if you liked it. You can also find me on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. And remember to notice and celebrate miracles everywhere, because the more miracles